Well, good morning, church. It is a special moment to be able to listen to the voice of a child proclaim God and their faith in Him. I don't know if you guys can remember back to the day when you were baptized. You ever thought about that for a moment? What was the color of the carpet? Where was your family sitting? Was it like this? Welcome, family. We're so glad you guys are here to celebrate with us this morning. Maybe we're celebrating with you, but definitely celebrating what God is doing. Do you remember, were there flash photography? Back in the day, was it like the cube exploded when they took a picture of you? Was it on video? Was it a small church? Were you in a pool, in a river, in a feed, a feed trough? Were you in some kind of, tank that cows would normally, drink out of, and somebody decided that's where you need to be baptized? What was it like for you? And it's a thing to go back and remember. Now, I will tell you this. I've been baptized 3 times in my life. And some of you are thinking, that's not scripturally accurate. There was one time, it was a profession of faith. I was 9 years old. And like these young men stood before our church and made a profession, that I had made this decision. I was committing to become like Christ. And as a 9-year-old, I didn't fully understand it. So God has continued to refine that idea throughout my life. The second time I was baptized was just a moment of celebration as I was touring the Holy Land. We went to the Jordan River one day. And we got on white robes and we went down, and anybody from our party had a chance to just celebrate what God had done in their life through a baptism. And it wasn't the profession of faith that you would see like in this, but it was just a moment to thank God. And so we stood, and it was ice cold water. Like you went down, it took your breath away, and you brought people back up. And my pastor at that time baptized me in the Jordan. My third baptism took place in between those two events. From my 9-year-old baptism to the time I would think I was like 37, 38 when I was baptized in the Jordan. And Tim kind of joked that he wasn't going to hold him down until all the bubbles were gone, right? Well, that's kind of the story of this third baptism that took place. When I was a student worker, I was a volunteer at our church. Our youth pastor and our music worship pastor planned a trip together. We were going to go to Tennessee. We're going to be on the Ocoee River where they did the 96 Olympics. All the water events happened on this section of the Ocoee River. There's a dam that releases water upstream from us, and we're camping on the edge of this river. And so one day we had been doing ministry stuff. We had done concerts and little worship sets, and our worship pastor had scheduled a day for us to go river rafting. Now, I'd never done that before, so I was kind of excited. But there's a tendency for me in my excitement to also be a little anxious. It's happened a couple of times in my life, and I'll use those stories later on. But I'm sitting here thinking I'm responsible in some part for about 35 to 40 students, maybe even more than that. And we're about to go down this river that was used for Olympic competition. Okay, God, you've got this one. And so the day came, and we're sitting there, and you've got the goofy helmet on, you put on your life jacket, and they have you sit down in the raft, and it was the big inner tube raft kind of thing, like you would see in professional rafting journeys down the Colorado or something. So we get in, and they're teaching us what you do, how you row and how you steer, and each boat is going to have 4 to 5 people in it plus a guide. And the guide was going to really do all the heavy work. We're there just to kind of look good as we go down and enjoy this ride. But on this part of the Ocoee, there were level 3 and level 4 rapids. Now, level 3, I'll tell you this, level 6 is like Niagara Falls, okay? That's like level 6 equals imminent death. Okay, level 5 would be what you see in professional competition and water being spewed out of these hydraulics. And hydraulic is when there's a rock in the river and the water hits the rock and turns in underneath itself and shoots back up. And that's what you see on top. It looks beautiful, but underneath it's violence. Level 3 just kind of works its way down, and level 1 would be like a canoe trip up in Oklahoma on the, going to Beaver's Bend, right? So there's not, a little bitty drop, maybe a foot. Just kind of calm water. Sometimes you got to work really hard. So he's telling us we're going to see level 3 and level 4 rapids. And at the very end, there's this thing called table saw, and it's a series of 4 different rapids back to back around the bend of this river. When we get through that, we're done. And we'll get off the rafts and we'll celebrate. There'll be a hot dog cookout. So I'm thinking, we got to get to the end. Now, in my raft, there's a unique makeup of people. My wife was with me. In front of her is a kid named Kevin. Now, he's not our kid, but just happened to be 2 Kevins in the same boat. Usually that works out well for me. I'll tell you the story later. So then in front of me is a little girl named Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth is the sweetest of kids. She's probably 14, 15, 16 years old, but she has some special needs. And so everything you see is just really, really happy. I mean, she's always clapping. She's always celebrating. If you do something, whether you flub it or whether you nail it, she's going to celebrate you. She's going to say, yay, good job. And she's just, happy. And then we've got our guide in the very front. He's on the very tip of the boat. And this dude's got bleach blonde hair. He's got the tan. He's rock solid. He's probably not about maybe this tall compared to me, but this dude's just ready to go. And he rides this every single day, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day. So we're in pretty good hands. And he says, look, here's the one key. When you get thrown out, and it's like, wait a minute, you used the wrong qualifier. Isn't it if we get thrown out? And he goes, well, maybe. He goes, just expect, you're probably going to get thrown out. It's not a big deal. But when you get thrown out, excuse me, can we use a different qualifier? I got a question. Can we say if? I want to stay in the boat. He's like, just listen. When you go in the water, don't fight the current. Don't go head first. Don't lay on your stomach. Don't try to swim with the current. What you need to do is to grab your life vest up here at the arms, cross your feet, stick them straight out, and just relax. And what will happen is when you hit one of these hydraulics, it will kick you back up above to the surface of the water. When you reach the surface, you look around, and when you make eye contact, if there's another boat by you, they have a lifeline, and they will throw it to you. But they will not throw it to you until you make eye contact. Do not take your arms off of your life vest until the rope is coming to you. Grab the rope, hold on tight, cross your legs, they'll pull you in, no big deal. And so it's like, okay, perfect. But I've got Kevin, and I've got Elizabeth. And I'm concerned, I think Kevin's okay, but he's scared of water. I don't know why he's on a rafting trip, but he's kind of scared of water. My wife's a pretty strong swimmer, so I'm pretty confident about her. I'm an okay swimmer, but you put 260 pounds of pure muscle in the water, and muscle has a tendency to sink to the bottom. So I'm kind of like, man, but I got to watch out for Elizabeth. I'm concerned about her. Now, my guy in the front, he's got insurance. I'm not really concerned what happens to him. He's the company's problem. I'm focused on Elizabeth. So we launch into this beautiful, crystal clear little pond area. It's a little eddy where the water kind of comes back on itself. It's really calm, and we're going along, and we're enjoying this. The water's, it's absolutely crystal clear. It's crisp. And about 200 yards down, we see this little marker thing. And so we're going, and that's the mark where everything begins. And so we're going around, and he's telling us, hey, this is the section where they would start off the day, and in the Olympics, here's what's happening. And he's and the history is this, and they release this every once in a while, and all of a sudden, he stops for a second. He begins to look down at the water, and he says, okay, we got, things are changing. It's almost like we're at Disney, and they kind of tell you, oh, the rapids are coming, and you start to tense up a little bit, but you know it's fake. Well, he looks at the water. When he gets concerned, I'm concerned. We go by the marker on the side, and you can literally see the water go from 3 to 4, and it starts to touch the 5 number. And what has happened is they've released the dam up 2 hours early before they're supposed to. And so he looks back at us and says, I told you we're going to see level 3 and level 4s. We're about to hit level 4, level 5 rapids. So I need you guys to shift your weight to the inside boat, and I need you to make sure you lock your leg underneath the pontoon in front of you. It's go time. What does go time mean? Well, this is when the if definitely changes to the when. And it's like, at some point, we're going to go in. So I'm locking my leg. I'm looking at Elizabeth. Lock your leg, lock your leg. Yay! And she's having a fun time. So here we go. We hit the first rapid, we come out, no problem. Water's everywhere. It's ice cold, but you get used to it. You're like, yeah, this is great. So we're going down, we're paddling. Hit the next one, it's level 4. We go shooting out. We kind of jump to the side, then we right back up, and it's really getting interesting. It's fun. So he's coaching us. There are the 4 or 5 pontoons around us. We're all at it. Sometimes we're bumping into people. You see somebody get turned sideways, and our guy goes, watch, this is the wind. They're about to go in, and they hit a rapid, and it looks like they're about to flip over, and then it kicks them over. It's almost as if the boats cannot be tumped. And then we get to table saw. And you can see it's like spit coming out of the ocean, right? It's like that spray, and it's these hydraulics kicking water up out of the river. And he looks at us and says, put your paddles in the boat, lock them in, grab the pontoon, and hold on, because it's going to get interesting. And I'm thinking, Elizabeth. I'm like reaching out to grab her. We get turned almost sideways and hit the first hydraulic, and we all go in the water. The only people left are my wife and Kevin Kirkman. Thank goodness, because he's already afraid of water. I go in and I look and I see that the guide is gone and I see Elizabeth is gone, and obviously I'm in the water. And so just as I grab my life vest and go to kick my feet out in front of me, I can see their heads bopping ahead of me. And so I'm trying to keep an eye on Elizabeth. Again, not concerned about the guide. He's got his own deal with Jesus. Let him figure that part out. So I've got my life vest, I've got my feet out, and all of a sudden I go under. And you hear that, there's that sound of the water, and it's just kind of roaring around you, and I can see the first rock, and I hit it, and I'm thinking, okay, just be patient. I can look over, I can see the bottom of the boat. If I can just break this cycle and get up, I'm gonna get a lifeline. And just as I go to the surface, guess what? It draws me down again. Same breath. So now I'm thinking, this is not good. This is a bad win. This is not good. So I'm holding on even tighter, but I'm trying to relax. I'm keeping my feet. I'm trying to fight that to keep in the right place. And I see the second rock. Now they're about 15, 20 yards apart. So I'm pushing pretty good speed. I hit the second hydraulic. I go down. The rock hits me on the back of my thigh and tumbles me over and pushes me back up. And just as I get to the surface, drives me back down again. Same breath. So now there's that moment that Tim talks about when Jesus begins to appear. And you're thinking, please tell me that you're not going to welcome me home. I don't want to be coming home yet. Please, where is Elizabeth? And he's just like, I can see him like reaching out his hand, ready to welcome me into eternity, right? And all of a sudden I hit the third hydraulic and it pushes me through the surface. I pop up. I probably look like a boat that's been resurrected, like a submarine coming out of the water. This big, huge, 6'3", 260-pound man coming out, and I look up and I see the boat, and we make eye contact. They throw me the lifeline. It hits right across me. I take my hands off. I grab the rope, and as I grab it, I look up, and on the side over here where the rocks are, there's Elizabeth staring at me, going, "Yay! Yay, Kevin!" And I'm like, okay, she's good. I nearly died, but she's got this thing mastered. They slowly pulled me in. I think what happened was the pontoon was pulled to me. I wasn't pulled to the pontoon. I got in the boat. They got to the side. We all laughed. We had a great time. I texted some of my former students about the story to get some names correct, and it was like this huge chat room about the trip on the Ocoee in that moment, because several boats got tomped and people got thrown in. That was my third baptism moment. That's the closest I think I've been to Jesus. Maybe that and times my mom would discipline me, but that's a different story. You ever felt like that? Where you're in that moment of turmoil and chaos, and you think you've done everything you're supposed to do. You've grabbed onto the right things, you've got the right posture, and you think you're about to come back up, but it just keeps pulling you down, right? The chaos and the turmoil seem to be in control. And I'm not talking about being on a river, I'm talking about life. You ever been in that moment? Maybe you're in that moment right now and you feel like if any moment I could hit the right place, I would come out of this and things would be okay. Somebody would throw me a lifeline. You may be even praying that somebody would come in after you. And they told us explicitly, no one's going to jump in after you. One person in danger is bad enough. Two people in the same danger is unacceptable. So unless they're in the water because they got tomped, they're not coming for you. And sometimes we would plead, please, somebody come in and give me a hand. Somebody reach over from the boat. Somebody throw me a lifeline. I can't seem to make it to the top. Something else is controlling me. And I don't know if you've ever been in that situation, but that ride seems to last forever. And you're gasping for air. And you begin to plead for Jesus, come into the moment. You see, this morning as we look at the continuing story of Joshua, they don't actually get into the water. But when we look at the Jordan River, I want you to understand the way it's described is turmoil. What is normally a very smooth flowing river that irrigates the land as it passes through. They've built irrigation ducts, they pump water out of it. But the description that we're about to read talks about the River Jordan being in flood stage. It's over the banks. It's pushing past trees and rocks. It's probably at a level 4, level 5 hydraulic. And this is what the nation of Israel walks up to when God says to them, you're going to take the promised land. Now, when the spies crossed over, that isn't the story. We don't hear anything about the river. So most likely, at that point, it may have been a little bit lower. nice and calm. They probably got in the water, maybe did a little washing of the clothes or something, we don't know. But when the nation gets there, it's the harvest season and the waters are flooding. And we're going to look at what God instructs them to do, what the nation of Israel does in the face of turmoil. So if you have your scriptures, open up to Joshua chapter 3. We're going to read specifically starting in verses 14 and through verse 17. Now let me kind of bring you up to speed. We're kind of jumping around. Last week was the spies with Rahab. So now they've gone back. The spies have reported to Joshua. Joshua has received word from God. It's time to go. They pack up the camp and they move to the banks of the Jordan. Now they're on the eastern side. And God says, I want you to march to the edge and I want you to stop. You're going to wait there 3 days. You're going to consecrate yourselves and then I will instruct you on how you will cross the river. And so they walk up to the river's edge. It's turmoil, it's turbulence, it's chaos. The water looks dangerous. And they begin to take their spot waiting. God speaks, God moves, and something incredible happens. So read with me starting in verse 14. Joshua chapter 3, verse 14, this is what it reads. So when the people set out from their tents to pass over the Jordan, with the priests bearing the ark of the covenant before the people. And as soon as those bearing the ark had come as far as the Jordan, and the feet of the priests bearing the ark were dipped in the brink of the water, now the Jordan overflows all of its banks to the time of the harvest. The waters coming down from above stood and rose up in a heap very far away at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan. And those flowing downward towards the Sea of Arabah, the Salt Sea, were completely cut off, and the people passed over opposite of Jericho. Now the priests, bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord, stood firmly on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan. And all Israel was passing over on dry ground until all the nation finished passing over the river. An incredible moment. I just want to point out a few things in this passage. First of all, when it talks about this moment, a miracle happens. Now, I was looking through some stuff and research this week. There have actually been 6 documented cases where the Jordan River has stopped flowing. The latest one, I believe, was in 1956, and there was an earthquake that happened. The rock ledges on part of the Jordan River, the rocks fell into the water and created a natural dam. And so from that point down, it began to slow, dry up, began to just be mud, quit flowing, but there was a stoppage of the river. You see, what happens here is supernatural. There isn't a rock that gets put into the water. Now God could have easily said, watch this, and picked up a rock from the ledge and levitated it over and dropped it in the water, and it still would have been a miracle. But he doesn't use anything physical. All it says is the waters upstream stopped at the city of Adam and rose up in a heap. In the research, we know that there is no description of destruction of the city of Adam. Adam isn't washed away. If you've ever seen moments where they've dammed up a river, they have to evacuate the little towns and villages that are upstream, because what happens is as we build a dam, the waters begin to build up behind it, create a natural reservoir, and everything that's in that river's path, it's a town or a city, is going to get flooded. And you go to these dam places and you can see there's little towns, and sometimes they take diving excursions, and that's where training takes place. And you dive in and you see that there's old churches and there's old storefronts and there's old homes, but nothing survives that. But in the account we see with Joshua, nothing upstream was destroyed. Now, the people who are in Jericho were already in fear because of what God did at the Red Sea. Right? When God took the waters and opened it up, and the nation of Israel marched across, and as the Egyptians came and the fire lifted the cloud, the barrier, and they began to go in the same path, and God let the waters of destruction come upon them. Imagine what they're going through now. That what should have been destructive waters now are calmed by God for his purposes. And in the moment that it happens, they don't have to wait 3 months for the ground to dry up. The ground instantly is dried. Not only is it not destructive, not only is it perfect for walking, where they're walking in this moment, which once seemed like chaos and danger, is a smooth path for even the ark to stand on. So the miracle that takes place here is not because of some phenomenon. At the worst possible moment, at what seems to be the worst possible place, God commands his people, this is where you will cross. And it goes against our intuition, it goes against our intellect. And sometimes when we stand at the river's banks of life and we're sitting there and we're thinking, this could not be a worse moment. What once brought life to the land now is destroying it. And what once should be a place where we thrive, we're fighting destruction and chaos. Maybe it's relationships. Maybe it's the plans you've put in place. My mom would often tell me that she had 2 sisters and her dad bought shares in a well in Oklahoma. And one day she came into me and she goes, if your dad and I were ever planning on retiring on this oil well, I want to show you how good of a plan that would have been. And she literally showed me a check for a penny. The production from the well was so little and oil was so low that check was worth 1 penny. And maybe that's the thing you're looking at. You're like, I had plans in place and everything's supposed to be working well, but now it's turmoil. Now it's chaos. Now I'm in a moment of unsureness. And I want you to understand what happens here. You see, when we come to those places, we're looking in the face of turmoil. I want us to see a truth that we wait on God in the face of turmoil. You see, he didn't tell them just go headstrong into the waters. He didn't say this gold box that you're carrying that's probably worth priceless amounts of money, but it probably weighs hundreds of pounds. If you hold on to that, you're gonna float across the river. I want you to go start building a ferry. We're gonna get everybody across. I tell you what, we're gonna build a supernatural bridge that's never been built before. Now, God could have done all of those things, but what he says to the nation of Israel is, when you get to the river's banks, wait on me. And so we pull out of this passage, the very first thing is, we recognize that there's turmoil coming. Don't wait till you're in the water. Don't wait till you're like your pastor and you're holding onto your life vest for dear life and you're trying to posture yourself in the right place because chaos is ensued and you're in the water. He's saying before you get there, when you're standing face to face and you know it's coming, stop for a moment. Now that is counterintuitive to us. When we face those hard moments, we want to start pulling up bootstraps and getting our big boy pants on and we want to get after it. But in this passage, waiting on God in the face of turmoil does 2 things. It demonstrates faith in God, and it prepares us to follow him. While they're waiting, God tells them to consecrate themselves. 2 weeks ago on Mother's Day, we had a row of families up here with a bunch of little babies, little children. And we did what our bylaws call consecration of children. And that's kind of a confusing term because in a few moments they're going to walk into Jericho and God says, I have consecrated everything in Jericho to me, which means they will destroy everything. Living, animated, non-animated, buildings, everything will be destroyed because it belongs to God. When we consecrated our children, it wasn't death involved. It was simply saying, these are your gifts to us. We want to raise them to seek after you. When they go to the river's edge and they stop and wait for 3 days, they consecrate themselves, which means they're prayed over and they remind themselves, claiming to God, you are our God. This is the commitment you make to us on the mountain, that you will be our God and we will be your people. And we commit in the face of turmoil. We don't know how this next step is going to happen, but we trust we're about to take a step. And when we do that, we trust that we are your people. So prepare us to walk across. And if that means supernaturally we're going to walk on water, then praise Jesus, we'll do it. They didn't say that, we say that. They didn't know Jesus at that point. If in that moment I have to go back and be reminded God is demonstrating his love towards me and I can put my faith in him. And so for 3 days, it took them this time to prepare and to demonstrate faith. And then once they were prepared and ready, God says, now here's the next step. The Ark of the Covenant is going to pass through the camp. And I want you to observe a proper distance. The Ark of the Covenant is represented in several ways early in the Old Testament. One, it is called the Ark of the Covenant. So Moses comes off Mount Sinai, and he's got these commandments, right, on tablets. And God commands him to build this ark, this box, and he will put these things in there. And as they spent time in the desert, they took the manna that they were given, and they put it inside the ark. And there's some other things they'll put inside of here, but those things are sacred reminders. And this box becomes the presence of God. Now, Moses had told the people, wherever the ark goes, you must remain 1,000 paces behind it. We will later on see that there's a story where the ark is sitting on a cart that's being brought back from Philistine captivity. It's later on in the Old Testament, but the cart begins to shake, right? And the ark that's sitting on it begins to fall. And some dude in his kindness wanted to protect the ark, who's not sanctified to do it, reaches up and he touches the ark, and what happens to him? Immediately he dies. And Moses tells the people in his time, 1,000 paces. Do not get close to this. You are not sanctified for that presence yet. And so when Joshua commands to follow the ark, they're following behind. Now let me tell you the significance for me in this. They're in a place where they can still see the ark, but they're not running beside it. They're not walking beside God going, okay, God, I think our next move should be this. Hey, buddy, I think what you could do in this next moment is for me to be able to. He doesn't need that counsel from us. Our position to him is distant enough in reverence because of our sinfulness, but yet we can still see him. Number two, we are never to walk in front of that. There should never be a place in my life where I say to God, follow me. I got this figured out. I know you're God, but I'm Kevin, right? He never wants us to walk in front of him. And what happens is that when we can't see the ark, he's going to make a turn of direction and we're going to follow on in the wrong place. But when we're 1,000 feet behind it, when we are sitting in the right position in the right place, what happens is that when God makes a move, we see the change and we follow behind. And that's what's happening here. In the face of turmoil, we wait on him. And I wonder if you've stood at the water's edge this week and said, life is out of control. It is absolutely chaos. And you step back from that and say, okay, God, I'm going to hang tight for a second. This, in its very definition, is Sabbath. It's not kicking your feet back and watching TV. It's not taking a nap. And I'm all about Sunday naps. So I think God has ordained that in this season of life. But it is waiting with anticipation. It's David standing in the trees looking. We've already had that reference, right? We've preached on that. We had it in the series. But it's looking, waiting for him to move. And I wonder, in your waiting, in your moment of Sabbath, are you seeking what God is doing in this moment? And are you committing yourself to say, whatever it is that you choose to do, I will follow? You see, not only do we know that waiting on God in the face of turmoil allows this to happen, but we also understand that God makes threatening situations peaceful. As they sit there on the river's edge, they consecrate themselves. God puts a plan in place that he's going to solve the turmoil. That through his presence and through his power, he's going to make crooked ways straight and hilly ways flat. What does Jesus say? My yoke is easy and my burden is light. And sometimes we don't understand that as we look at the turmoil. And we don't fully understand in this moment what the plan really is. But if I can understand that he's going to make threatening situations peaceful, it's not so I can make it easy. It's one, it encourages and strengthens us. When you go through hard times, you know that God is your champion. You know that God is advocating for you. He has not abandoned you. He wants to walk before you. He wants to make this path straight. He wants to make a riverbed filled with silt and mud and all kinds of vegetation dry and smooth. Doesn't mean that he may never command you to jump into the waters. But we also know in this moment we see he can bring peace. It also is using the opportunity for one particular thing, to bring glory to himself. when he stops the waters the way he does, when he makes the ground dry the way he does, when he marches the ark across. It says, as they stood by the riverside, and the ark came through, and they were 1,000 feet away from it, and they saw, as soon as the priests who were carrying this ark on pieces of wood, and they stepped and their feet touched the water, immediately this took place. There is no natural phenomenon that can take credit for this moment. I love it when God gives us intellect and we're able to do things. Surgeries, engineering, science, and we see these incredible things happen, and you're wondering, how is it possible? I had a family in a former church. They had a baby who was born, and he had a brain issue. I think it was a tumor. And lo and behold, the one person who could operate on it he's doing his practice in Baltimore. And so they go and they try to seek an audience with him. He hears their case, and he says, I can do this. And Ben Carson healed their son. When he ran for president, guess who I was voting for in the primaries? Because I'm loving that dude, because I love this family. Now, unfortunately for me, Carson didn't make it. I'm okay with the presidency as it is. I think God worked through that. But to see that a man was trained and had the skills and the knowledge and refined it to the point that he could save a human being's life in this moment. And I give praise to God for that, just like Ben Carson does. But in this situation, God does something that no man can take credit for. And it's because he wants everyone to know, I'm here. I showed up. I showed out, and I got the situation. Again, the people in Jericho, not only did he stop the sea, he stopped the river. This God's coming for us. We were melting before, we're melting now. And I wonder, have you seen the moments when you've stopped and been peaceful for a moment and had Sabbath that God began to work? And he began to soften hearts, and he began to change finances, and he began to open up markets, and he began to open up new relationships and networks and people of peace, and the things that he did that seemed impossible for human beings to do, but God came through. And in that moment, it's like all of a sudden what seemed like chaos became absolute peace. What was a treacherous step that could have caused death became dry, smooth ground. And all you had to do was take a step. How good is God for us? That this is what he strives to do. What seems impossible for us, it is. I'm going to say this, and I want you to hear me, and I've said it before. There is a phrase we love to use in our culture that says, God's not going to give me more than I can handle. This is more than they can handle. No matter what they chose to do, it was going to be more than they could tolerate. They would not survive that. The ark would have been gone. The priests would have been dead. The people would have sacrificed themselves in disobedience. But in the situation, he didn't give them more than he could handle through them, that he could handle for them. And that's where our demonstration of faith and trust is. Not in our abilities, but in what he's going to do for us and to bring glory to himself. They walk across, and they're commanded to take one stone for each tribe out of this dry ground. Normally what would be used as a weapon or a tool is used as a memorial. And they build this 12 stones that will come back into play. But as a reminder, you see, not only is it wait patiently, not only is it God is bringing peace, but remember God's work in your life and do that with thanksgiving. You know what's beautiful about this moment? If you go on and read, and I'll post these readings of the other scriptures around this moment, but if you continue reading in Joshua chapter 3, something amazing happens. You see, they've passed in front of the ark. Now remember, 1,000 feet. So this isn't just a little walkway in the river. This is the next town up, down to the ocean is dry. And 1,000 feet away from the presence of God, the entire nation of Israel walks before God. They pass over this river. And so guess what Joshua was commanded to do? Build an altar, stop for a moment, and take communion. Observe the Passover. You see, they were taking what God had done in the past and remembering in the current moment that it spoke into this. And that the Passover of Egypt, of the death angel, is the same as what happened here. And that walking before God is something we should always strive to do. And in this moment, God allows the nation of Israel to walk before him and to walk ahead of him and wait patiently for him to then move forward. And they They pitch their tents, they sit for a moment, and then they begin to observe the communion, the Passover. Realizing that what God did in Egypt was similar to what he was doing now. The champion of 40 years ago, 50 years ago, is the champion now. And that will stay that way with this altar built in place, that it will remind them not only of what had happened in the past, but what God can do for them come the future, because they're about to face a wall. They're about to get their bottoms, their backsides handed to them by a bunch of farmers. People don't understand how angry farmers can get. Parenting, we know that, don't we? You mess with a man's farm, be ready to pay the consequence. You let horsetails fly over from your farm to their farm, and it's go time. I heard a story of one man who told me that when they found out there were some people coming after his grandfather's farm, they wanted to take his title from him. He told his workers, go to Ochiltree, buy every gun and every bullet, and come back. We're about to have a sit-out. We're going to wait for them to come for the farm, and we're going to show them what we can do. Don't mess with farmers. And Israel is about to mess with a bunch of farmers and get their backsides handed to them. They're about to go into battle against forces that are stronger than them, that have better alliances, and God's going to hold the sun in place. But they won't know how to do that if they don't stop and take a moment to remember what has been done. One of my concerns for our church and the American church is that God has done this many times, and we've forgotten. What's your altar? I have two pictures on our family wall in the sunroom. And those two pictures of my kids on their day of baptism. And as a father, as a student pastor, I got to baptize my own children. And it reminds me of the great things that he has done. My son's confession as a 6-year-old of God's salvation work. And waiting patiently for my daughter to confess that Jesus Christ was her Lord and Savior. That was the longest wait of my entire life, of anything I've ever waited for, because I felt like she was in jeopardy. And one day she finally came into us as parents and said, I want to know about Jesus. And it wasn't because of the communion crackers. It was because the Spirit was revealing that she was lost, that she was a sinner and needed God. And I was able to look back on these pictures every time I walk in that room and reminded of what God can do. I have a picture of my father that sits in this frame, and it reminds me that a man who was lost serving in the Korean War, that God preserved him until he came back home, saved his mother and his stepfather through a letter he wrote praying for them to ask for God to protect him. And he came back home, and he accepted Christ one night at 5:01 when he got off of work working in a carbon black plant. That event changed the nature of my family. And I have to go back from time to time and remember what he has done in our own lives, because I have to have faith that in these next tough times that are going to come, that he's going to come through again. But I've got to go back and be patient, have Sabbath. I've got to go back and wait for him to move and make this peaceful for me, and then I've got to walk in obedience. But when I get to the other side of this, I never want to forget what he's done. We often say we don't know what we should tell people. Tell them these stories. Tell them what he's done for you. Go back and write this down. Create an altar in a journal. Take a picture of something. Put it where you never forget it. Put it in your car. Put it in your bathroom. Put it on your mantle next to your TV. Remember the things that God has done for you. It is the altar of worship and praise on your own personal journey of faith with God. And you trust in that moment that what he did then, which was powerful, that he's going to do again. Now, this seems like an easy thing, and it's okay until something bad happens. I've said this quote before, and it's apropos now, that the great theologian Mike Tyson once said that everyone has a plan until you get punched in the nose. We think about this. We see the connection between moments of faith, but when all of a sudden we're throat punched, and we've got stuff in our eyes, and our nose is bleeding, and life has kicked us in the gut, now it's the moment where this plays out. Now, I got to tell you, I didn't go through life and then write this story. I didn't think about where we were and then developed a sermon series. This sermon series was planned months ago. But as we as a church, are we not in this spot right now? That collectively, something has been done outside of our control, and we're wondering what's going to happen now. And I will tell you, there are 3 storylines I want to remind you of that God reminded me of this week. That we have a man who lost his job. And we suffer for that. We're angry, we're hurt, we're confused, we're grieving. And the crazy thing is, we're the ones in the turbulence. That man's in peace. And he is demonstrating for us what it means to look in the face of turmoil and put his faith and trust in Jesus Christ, that he actually has control of the situation. Now, it's not a lifestyle he had to cultivate in the last 5 days, 2 weeks. This is something God has been developing in his heart over his entire life, living as a child of God. And I'm thankful for Tim Ramsey walking with honor and respect and putting his faith in Jesus Christ and showing us what it means to walk in peace when we're facing that river of turmoil. I sat in the living room of a man this week, and on Thursday morning at 6 o'clock had a moment of worship in his house, along with the other men from prayer breakfast. And we sat with Brian Poole, and he showed us what it does to walk in the face of death with honor and peace and strength, while the rest of us live in turmoil because we don't understand this decision. This thing is out of our control. And I watch he and Glenna both show us what it means to walk in peace. And as I'm having that conversation with a friend, he says, that's similar to my storyline. And a man whose son went missing Thanksgiving of 2016 walks in our community every single day. And when we struggle with the fact that that son has not come home, you know what he says? God's got this. He is walking before everyone when everybody else is disarrayed and their eyes are watery and they got punched in the nose and they don't understand how to handle this. And he says to them, put your faith in God. He's got total control over all of this. And the man who should be disrupted is the man who has composure, and the people who should be composed walking with him are shuddering in fear. 3 examples of those kinds of men who walk before us. Now, I'm sure that there are other stories like this. And I'm sure that there are other women who are doing the same thing. But I think God brought to my mind 3 men who are showing us what it means to look at a place in a moment of turmoil and demonstrate faith in Jesus Christ. And how if we wait, he will make the way peaceful. And if we remember, we can walk future steps in strength and courage. And I will tell you this, church, I have not done that well. I have had moments of anxiety for Kelly Brown. I've had moments of anxiety for Brian. I've had moments of anxiety for Tim. And every time I listen to them talk, it brings peace. Not because of who they are, but because of who they talk about. And I would tell you, even if you feel like the river has grabbed you and pulled you in and is pulling you under, there is still peace to be had. You remember that moment when the disciples are on the boat and they flip out, right? Because the big storm comes up. And they're trying to figure out how we're going to survive this. And guess who's asleep in the boat? Jesus is. And they're like, Jesus, wake up, dude. How can you be asleep on a day like this? We're about to die. And he's like, again, do you not understand who I am? And the God who owns the waves, who created the wind, speaks a moment and peace is brought. Now that's a beautiful story, but I'm not in the boat with Jesus. But I have been in the boat with Paul. And I've been a man who did not have God's favor, and because of God's favor on someone else, I think it played out for me. If you remember the story for Paul, it's very similar. He's been arrested. Paul has been told by God, you're going to stand before Caesar. And so every time he faces trial and persecution and near-death experience, he has this unthinkable courage because he knows God's word's going to come true. And he's in the boat, they're taking him towards Rome, and he comes across a storm. And the people on the boat flip out. These pagans who don't know God, who don't put their faith in him, they begin to untie everything, cut ropes, trying to throw everything overboard to lighten the ship so it can survive this. And they're about to hit a sandbar and completely destroy this boat. And Paul gets a word from God. You and everyone with you will survive. Now the waters don't calm, but God still brings peace in that moment. And as the ship breaks apart, these people are thrown into the water, and every one of them make it to the shore. They find that on this shore that they think is abandoned, there's a village of people who come and help them. And all these incredible things are happening because in the moment when it seems like chaos has come to reign, God shows his strength. My encouragement to you is to go home and write 2 things down. 1, be remembered of that moment that David and Tim talked about this morning when we tried to take things into our own hands, when we were distant from God and we kind of became God in that moment. That's the definition of sin. Write that down. And then next to it, write down the moment that God overcame that and he demonstrated his power and his peace in the moment you thought it was all over with. And I want you to write that down because that is as a verbal altar to be praising God with thanksgiving. And then I want you to share it with somebody. I want you to invite someone out to a meal. I want you to invite them to your house. I want you to create space with them, and I want you to go back and I want you to share this story with thanksgiving over what God has done. It is a moment of profession of faith in God, and it is a moment of worship. I love that this morning we sang songs to God about what he's doing. And we sang songs about God, his character, and who he is. And I've told you once, I've told you again, I'll remind you, Sundays, the songs we sing will always have that content. But that isn't near the kind of worship as when I sit down with someone and describe God's mercy. And I proclaim my faith in him because of what he's done in his loving kindness. That is praise. In the moment that I can live that kind of way, what I will see is Jesus, who is my strength and courage, provides peace in the midst of turmoil. And because of that, I will choose to take a step. Let's pray. Father, we are grateful. We are grateful that you don't abandon us. Father, we are thankful that although in this moment you told us to stay 1,000 paces away, we see that in the storyline, we have to keep our proper distance. That you are a God who is intimate. You are the Father. You are Abba. You care for us like a father cares for his children. But in the same way, you're also a holy and righteous God that we don't have the right to stand before you because of our filthiness. And we have to learn how to dance with you in that sense. But in this moment, that proper distance and proper posture towards you puts us in a place to respond. The face of turmoil isn't overcoming. And although it may be more than we can handle, you glorify yourself, that you can handle all things. And because of you, I can handle the things of the past. I've seen you work. I can give praise to those moments. And I can put my faith that you will help me handle things to come. And Father, we proclaim like Paul did, that because of Jesus Christ, I can do all things. And we are grateful for that. Father, you know the heart of our church. And I pray that you continue to let the Spirit attend us. And Father, I pray that in the moments we want to take control of things, and I'm there, I want to control the outcome. I want to jump the narrative. I want to speak the story that makes things favorable. I want to stop things. I want to hold on to things. I want to take control. I feel like it's my prerogative, and you remind me over and over again, as you've told us, whether it's in trips to Africa or trips back here or going back home or being a part of life situations, to just step back and let you be God. So Father, thank you for your patience with me. And I pray for mercy and patience for us as a church. But I am grateful for your mercy through Jesus Christ. And when it feels like we're facing this river of turmoil, we can have faith that you are our champion. And we're going to walk on dry ground, and we're going to experience peace like we never have before. And so, Father, in this next moment, I pray that you would hear the responsive prayers of your people. That you would attend to them. Let the Spirit hover above them and speak into their hearts. Father, let the Spirit apply the medicine that makes the wound go away. That takes the angst and takes it away from us and gives us a moment of calmness. And the Father, that takes the turmoil and the conflict and brings about peace and relationship. Remind us that you are our Father. We pray this in Christ's name with which we have this relationship. Thank you, Father. I invite you in this next moment to respond. And we have a team of people who pray, and they're going to come up. You have access to them. If you want them to pray over something, and you can give as many details as you want, or you can kind of hold off on the details. That's up to you. But you can ask these people, and they will pray over you. So I'm going to ask our prayer team to come on up front. Maybe you just need to spend a moment praying with someone next to you. You want to know one of the greatest rivers of turmoil in our life is the most intimate relationship that we share. That husband-wife thing, and that can be a river overflowing its banks. And so maybe this morning it's just you confessing to each other, asking for forgiveness and praying over each other. Maybe you need to consecrate your children. I know at times we want to consecrate them like Jericho and take care of it at once. And what God is calling us is to not lay them on the altar of death yet, but just give them to him. Let him father them. That's hard for us to walk that. Maybe you feel woundedness and you feel hurt and grief, and you just need God to attend to you. And I would invite you, let him do that now. But let's stand together. And as God has led you to pray, as God has led you to respond, then if you want to stay in your chairs, if you want to come up, if you want to kneel at the altar, if you want to sit in your chair, if you want to pray with each other, whatever God commands you to do, whatever God leads you in this next moment, just know that there are people who will walk with you through this and would love to pray with you. Let's stand and let's pray this together. I'm going to take a moment to close this in prayer together. And then we're going to do something unique. We've done it before, but this is for a unique purpose. So if prayer team, you guys can head back to your chairs if you want to. This weekend has a heavy connotation to it. And I think sometimes I get confused about what Memorial Day is actually about. It's not just about honoring veterans. There's a day in November called Veterans Day that we honor those who have served. It's not honoring those who fought in foreign wars. It's not for those who are still active duty. There are days for those things. The history of Memorial Day is following the Civil War. The Union decreed a day because of a woman, a person, who wanted to make sure we continue to give honor and remember the men and women who sacrificed their lives in the Civil War. And as we made peace with the Confederate side, and or peace was made with that, then they encompassed those soldiers also. Memorial Day was formed to remember the men and women who fought against each other, and eventually peace won out. Now that has then included other people, for those who died in serving our country, providing for our peace. And so I want to take a moment we've had celebrations this weekend. There have been things happening leading up to this day. I want us to take a moment to just a moment of silence for you to pray and give thanks. And if you've had a family member who actually qualifies, who meets that criteria, they sacrificed their lives in the act of service for our country, then just give thanks to God for that. And know that we are grateful to your family for what God has done through that. That we are able to worship in a place like this without any concerns. We don't have to register. We have nothing barring our freedoms to worship God. We can vote. Hopefully you voted this past week. You participate in civic duties. You serve on trials. All those things. We have those freedoms. And as you may get around a flame on the grill and may flip some hamburgers and hot dogs or steaks or barbecue, whatever you do, celebrate. Those men and women that died for our freedoms, use those freedoms. So I want us to just take a moment of silence to give thanks to God for that, and then I'm going to close this out in our service of prayer. So join me. Father, thank you for men and women who serve honorably, who did give all that they had so that we could live with freedoms. We know that is a gift from you. One time, Father, we know that President Lincoln had to write letters to a family who had lost multiple children, multiple sons in battle. And what he stated was a truth, that there was nothing that this government or the country could do to assuage the anger of a mother who has lost children in battle. But they can express their gratitude. We have faith that, Father, your Holy Spirit can bring comfort in those moments of loss. But may we as a nation never forget to be grateful to those families and to those men and women. Father, thank you for our freedoms. Father, thank you for Jesus Christ that brings us into a relationship of peace. And today, Father, as we have stood probably in multiple times this past week looking at waters that seem like absolute chaos, that you remind us that you are still in control. That if we will wait patiently, that there will be a moment where you will bring peace to this situation. And then, Father, once we go through this and we are on the other side, let us never forget to worship in thanksgiving. And so send us out this week. Let us find moments of Sabbath that we can stop and prepare ourselves when we see the conflict coming. Father, I pray that as we walk through that moment, that we realize we're walking in front of you. We are passing over this moment. So maybe we stop and take the meal again. And we give thanks to Jesus Christ that we have this relationship and that he has done this for us. And Father, as we go through this moment, I pray this next week that we would take the moment to share the stories of what you have done in our lives. That is the greatest act of praise that we could ever engage in. And so give us those opportunities. And so, Father, thank you for all that you continue to do. We pray these things in Christ's name.